Hello everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Wise Decision Maker Show, where we help you make the wisest and most profitable decisions. Today, I want to discuss why smart people, perhaps people like you, those you know, deny serious risks, and what you can do about it. So that's going to be the topic of today's show, risk denialism. Now, smart people deny risks very often, surprisingly often. You'd be really shocked by how often it happens. So for example, talk about smart people. Smart people presumably are in top leadership positions, and there is a correlation between people in top leadership position and intelligence, smarts in various exams and so on. So when you see the research on this topic, for example, there was a study of 286 organizations that fired their top executives. These are mostly companies, some nonprofits. They fired their top executives, and this talked to 187 board members of these organizations. What the study found was that 23% of these top leaders, 23%, were fired for denying negative reality, risks around their company, facts that were problematic around their company, their organization, what was happening. So they were fired for denialism. That's what they were fired for. It's not that they were fired for bad performance. They were fired for actually just denying the problematic situation in their company, either the bad performance in their company or negative external risks or a combination of both. Just denying that, being way too optimistic and denying these negative facts. And such denialism, especially if it's modeled by people in top leadership positions, really spreads throughout the organization. But it also happens even when top leaders don't experience or express risk denialism. It happens at all levels of the organization unless the organization takes proactive steps to address risk denialism. It just naturally happens. Negative information doesn't flow to the top, it doesn't get reported, various problems occur. So this risk denialism is very frequent and seriously problematic for all sorts of organizations and all sorts of leaders. The reason that such risk denialism happens for pretty much everyone, it's very common, it's very intuitive to deny risks, is that negative information, risky information, feels bad to us. We don't like it. And if you remember previous Wise Decision Maker shows, you'll recall that our emotions, when we just go ahead and let our emotions, when we go ahead and decide how we ordinarily, intuitively decide, when we go with our gut, our emotions determine 80 to 90% of the decisions that we make. 80 to 90%. So here's what ordinarily happens. Negative information, risks, and so on feels bad. It feels unpleasant. So we intuitively just flinch away from this negative information. We don't want to hear it. We don't like it. And we ignore it. And we sometimes punish people who bring us this information. So that's bad. That's problematic. But that's what happens. We don't like to feel bad. We don't like this. It's unpleasant. So what you need to understand is that it takes strong ability and emotional intelligence to address risk denialism. You want to overcome your instinct and develop a skill of welcoming negative information. Now, emotional intelligence, what's that? Emotional intelligence has to do with you being aware, intelligent about your emotions, and the other component of intelligence is managing your emotions. So emotional intelligence has to do with awareness and management of your emotions. So you have to be aware that we tend to flinch away from negative information, risks, threats, problems, negative realizations. I mean, there's a reason that nearly half the marriages in the US ended in divorce, right? It takes effort to overcome our instincts around negative information and then develop the skill, the ability to welcome, praise those who bring you negative information, praise yourself for accepting this and welcoming this negative information. It's a very hard, counterintuitive thing to learn, as are many things on the Wise Decision Maker show that help you make the wisest decisions. So that's something that you have to realize is part of your experience, and it's part of everyone's experience. And you're checking out this show, you're learning about it, other folks aren't. So they're going to be suffering from what's called the ostrich effect. So the ostrich effect is a cognitive bias, one of these dangerous judgment errors that talk about all the time that we make because of how our brains are wired, that cause us to deny negative reality. So it's called the ostrich effect. That's the technical scientific name for this risk denialism. Now, it was named after the mythical notion that ostriches stick their head in the sand when encountering threats. That's not what actually happens, but that's what it's named after. So the ostrich effect. You need to manage the ostrich effect within yourself. It's very tempting for us to stick our head in the sand or somewhere else when we don't want to face negative reality. And there are lots of other related cognitive bias risks which you need to learn how to manage as well. They're all talked about in my book, Never Go With Your Gut, How Pioneering Leaders Make the Best Decisions and Avoid Business Disasters. The ostrich effect is the really big key problem for risk denialism. Now, how do you deal with risk denialism in others? So you want to deal with it within yourself, and we talked about this emotional intelligence, getting awareness of when we're trying to flinch away from negative information and learning to welcome it. Welcome it instead. Praise yourself, praise others for giving you this information, praise yourself for welcoming it. What about others when they're denying negative information? How do you deal with them? Now, it's very tempting for us to just go ahead and argue with them by stating facts, stating risks, and then arguing with them when they deny that these are real facts, real risks. Unfortunately, arguments rarely change people's minds. You'll be surprised to hear that, but that's just what the reality is. Arguments are not great at changing people's minds. So just stating these facts, just stating the risks will not work. Because when people are denying pretty clear risks, when smart people especially are denying pretty clear risks, there's likely some emotional blocks that are going on. And remember, emotions determine 80 to 90% of our decisions, so you gotta assume that there are some emotions that are going on that are blocking that person's ability to appreciate and accept these risks. So to fight these blocks, use the strategy called eGrip. Don't just state facts, don't just state risks, don't argue, use eGrip instead. That is an acronym, eGrip, that stands for 5 steps, a 5-step method to deal with risk deniers effectively. First, you address their emotions because of the emotional block. Then you find shared goals. Then you build rapport. Then you share some of the unpleasant information, and then you give them positive reinforcement for changing their minds. Let's go through each of these steps in more depth. eGrip, emotions. So, again, emotions, you gotta assume, are at the root of why they're not accepting these risks. So, when someone denies facts, you have to assume that it's caused by their emotions and you want to understand what's going on. So we talked about emotional intelligence. That has to do with your understanding of yourself, your emotions, and your ability to manage your emotions. Now, the more complicated, perhaps, not necessarily, depends on the kind of person you are. Some people are more other-oriented. The other aspect of dealing with emotions is dealing with other people's emotions. And that has to do with social intelligence. So we have emotional intelligence, that's about us. Social intelligence is about other people. So social intelligence has to do with awareness of and the ability to manage, to influence other people's emotions and their relationships with you and with each other. That's what social intelligence is about. So when you are trying to understand other people's emotions, you have to employ the skill of social intelligence. So social intelligence is the crucial skill. And I talk about that more in my book, The Blind Spots Between Us, How to Overcome Unconscious Bias and Build Better Relationships. So you have to assume that their emotions are blocking them, and you have to identify what are the specific emotional blocks. What are the specific problems, specific challenging emotions? Is it fear? Is it anxiety? Is it grief? Is it anger? Is it frustration? Is it loss? What are these emotions? So, you identified the emotions, you have that in mind. What do you do next? Next, you establish shared goals. Understanding their emotions, you figure out within that space which shared goals would be most relevant. Because we all share goals with each other. You can think that, the people who are your, enemies, you still share 95% of the goals with them. You want to have a safe life, a happy life. You like your family, you support them. They like their families, they want a safe life, they want a happy life. Maybe the way they go about it is very different than you. But they still, they like their pets, you like their pets. Maybe you're a cat person, they're a cat person, or you're a dog person, they're a dog person, who knows? There's things that we don't realize that we share about with each other. So you still share a lot with them. And so these underlying goals, you have to figure out what are the goals that you share with them. If you're in the same company, if we're talking about your colleagues, you share the goal of the company making a profit and doing well for the world. If you are in another type of organization, you share the goal of achieving that mission of the organization. Whatever goals you share, figure those out. Establish those shared goals, so shared understanding about those shared goals, and understand that this is crucial to the next steps of sharing knowledge that will help them get over their emotional blocks. So the goal establishment is the crucial precondition. So you understand their emotions, you establish shared goals. Then, if you're collaborating on a shared project and you want the project to go well, maybe you have very different ideas about how it should go, but still you want it to go well. So for example, then after the goals, you get to rapport. Build rapport with them. Build an emotional connection. That's what rapport is about, where you connect with that person and you establish a sense of trust, a sense that you're on their side because you share goals and you understand their emotions and you echo their emotions to them. You use empathetic listening to hear them, hear the kind of concerns that they're raising. So you already understand their emotions, you have shared goals, they're going on to the specific concerns that they're expressing. Use empathetic listening to really get at the nitty-gritty details, the depths of their emotions and how with their emotional language, the blocks that they're experiencing, and you want to echo their emotions. Based from your previous understanding of their emotions and these nitty-gritty details that they're sharing, echo their emotions, use their language to show that you understand them, that you empathize with them, that you understand where they are, that you understand what they're feeling, and that you have shared goals. Here you also talk about your shared goals with them. Make clear that you share these goals, that you're on the same side. So you're showing them that you understand how they feel and that you're on the same side. And by doing that, you build up that bond of trust. This bond of trust is critically important for the next step, which is sharing information. So here you're going to those uncomfortable facts, that uncomfortable information, those risks that they're kind of denying. And again, usually what people would do is state these first and then argue about them. This is not good. It breeds a defensive response. So defensive response can be in two flavors: the fight response or the flight response. The fight response is where the person gets aggressive and starts arguing with you. The flight response can be them ignoring you or them nodding and saying, yeah, but they're shutting down inside and they're not actually hearing you, they're not paying attention to you, they're just waiting until you go away. Neither of those is great. So that's why you need to go through the whole e-grip and emotions, goals, and rapport. Those three: emotions, goals, rapport, before you get to sharing information. Now you share those uncomfortable facts in a very sensitive manner, highlighting how, hey, if they have the emotional block, if they have the challenging emotions that prevent them from accepting this negative information, these serious risks that they're denying, then you will not accomplish your shared goals. And that's what they want, isn't it? So provide this new information that they didn't realize before. Provide it in a new way, in the framing of your rapport, being on the same side, in the framing of these shared goals that you share that will be compromised by them not accepting this information, and with you understanding their emotions. So here you're challenging their lower level beliefs about the tactics that you use to accomplish their shared goals. But of course, it's all about your shared goals and you understanding their emotions. So you're shifting their perception, their beliefs around the right tactics to accomplish these shared goals. And that's the critical key. You still have the goal, they still get their underlying desires met, but they do it in a different way, in a way that accommodates and accepts the serious risks that they're denying. You want to be especially sensitive around the actual pain point, whatever it happens to be, their actual emotions. Be especially sensitive around that. Be careful when you talk around this issue, and you'll get from the sense of the conversation how much you want to push on this. So get a push on this while, as long as they're comfortable, don't go too far, and then they will very, very likely move at least somewhat toward your position, toward your perspective. And that's wonderful. That's exactly what you want. This e-grip is not necessarily a one-time conversation. It's not necessarily a one and done. It's something that you will probably have to have, a couple of times with someone. Depends on how big the issue is, how significant it is. I mean, if it's not too significant, you might get away with one conversation. If it's more significant and more basic to their emotions, this is a tactic that's really important to them, then it might take you more time. But anyway, they will somewhat shift toward your perspective, and the next step is providing them with positive reinforcement. I get frustrated with people who use e-grip and just use the e-grip part, and they don't get to this part because they feel, okay, I've got what I wanted, now I can move on and do other stuff. Positive reinforcement is fundamentally important. If you truly understand and value that emotions is what drives us, is what drives our decision making, our own and other people, then you'll realize how important this step is. So after the person changes their perspective, after they shift their belief somewhat toward your perspective, you gotta provide them with positive reinforcement. Say how difficult it is, how challenging it is, how much you appreciate that they shifted their perspective. It's not easy to change your mind. It's not easy to do it. And you really value them. You really value their ability to do that. That's a sign of a very powerful person, a strong person, a great leader, whatever the context calls for, that they're able to shift their perspective. Because you got to help them shift their emotions around this issue. If they just acknowledge in the moment that you're right, and then you don't give them positive reinforcement, they will likely backslide on the specific issue at hand. So you gotta get them to shift their emotions around this issue by giving them positive reinforcement for changing their mind. And you gotta give them positive reinforcement for the meta. The meta is the broader issue. So there's the cognition, our actual thought patterns, and there's metacognition, how we think about our thought patterns. And metacognition here is the ability to change your mind. The cognition is whatever they changed their minds on, whatever they shifted. The metacognition is the ability to change their mind. And so you got to give them praise for that as well, how that's a difficult thing, hard thing to do, and so on. So, e-grip. This is the key technique to address risk denialism in others. And again, remember, within yourself, you have to learn to overcome the ostrich effect, welcome negative information, and address these negative flinching away experiences within yourself, and understand that they happened within others as well, probably quite a bit more powerfully because they didn't learn about this information. So that's today's Wise Decision Maker show. I hope this show helps you make the wisest and most powerful and most profitable decisions. Again, please subscribe to the show on whatever venue you're checking it out. We have a video cast and a podcast. You can check out both. They're going to be in the show notes for whatever. If you're watching this on YouTube, if you're checking this out on iTunes or anywhere else, check out the show notes for the other one. If you're on the video, get the podcast, the video. Click like and share your comments. Love to hear what you think. And there will be much more information about the show in the notes. So check those out. All right. I look forward to seeing you next time. And until then, the wisest and most profitable decisions to you, my friends.